Viltrumites are the strongest race in the entire universe, but the strongest of them all is Thragg. This is the case for probably about 99% of Invincible, with pretty much zero contention even among the strongest Viltrumites. It's more like blatantly shown since his introduction in the Viltrumite War. If you haven't heard of that before, the Viltrumite War was... Thragg stands above them all, like seriously every single one. You could argue that Thragg might have been slightly pushed back before when it came to taking down some of the strongest Viltrumites like Omni-Man or Invincible, but it's not even debatable by the end of the series. Nolan's fist literally shatters by the force of Thragg pushing back his head, while Invincible only barely beats him by the end of the series. Now I can see a lot of people already disagreeing with that, so let me put some stuff in context. Mark was literally amped by Eve before the fight, and by his own admission made stronger. Then during the actual fight, Invincible and Thragg had what's essentially just a battle of attrition that completely depended on who can survive the longest against one another on the surface of the sun. While these two beat the shit out of each other, Mark was given this literal care package like an endgame Fortnite supply drop, which ended up armoring him up in the middle of the fight. And keep in mind that Viltrumites can regenerate extremely quickly, so even short-term resistance against damage can be extremely unfair. Basically, in short, what I'm trying to say is that nobody can fuck with Thragg. He's just too strong, even in interviews being compared to a brick wall by Kirkman himself compared to Omni-Man. But then that left me wondering, since pretty much not a single Viltrumite for the next 500 years could beat down Thragg in an honest 1v1, how many Viltrumites would it actually take to beat Thragg? Maybe 5 Viltrumites, 500, or maybe even 5,000? Immediately, the chip in my brain designed to construct the most pointless nonsense started calculating how many Viltrumites it would actually take to beat down Thragg. Believe it or not, through various statements and showings throughout Invincible, there's enough reasonable methods to actually find out what I would consider to be a pretty good estimate. The first entire part of this video was already glazing Thragg for being stronger than about 99% of Invincible, which means that you already pretty much get the idea. It'll probably take more than 1, 4, or even 6 Viltrumites to take him down, but that brings us to the next part of the video. How strong is one normal, or I guess you can say your typical Viltrumite? I really don't know how much Invincible content I plan on making in the future, so I'm not going to ask you guys to subscribe, but if you enjoy the video so far, then please leave a like, because it really does help out. Most of the Viltrumite Empire was completely wiped out way before the original series, and by the time that Omni-Man heads to Earth. There's only probably about 50 Viltrumites left, however that didn't stop them from attempting to conquer the entire galaxy even with an army that tiny. The Viltrumite Empire, even with just 50 Viltrumites, is still going to be feared by nearly everybody in the universe, with only members of their own race being able to withstand their insane power. Unless you're Space Racer with a gun that can literally destabilize the core of a planet, Alan the Alien with combat speed that can be measured to beyond light speed via his aerial movements through space, or I guess Battle Beast, who honestly speaks for himself. Pretty much nobody besides the Ragnar can rival Viltrumite power, which Thragg literally ends up putting on a leash in the war. There's many reasons why the Viltrumites became this powerful, but one key difference between this race of warriors and your normal humans is something called smart atoms. Because every Viltrumite has these smart atoms, they age slower, they can survive in the vacuum of space without protective gear or oxygen, they can heal from injuries extremely rapidly, and are practically immune to most known diseases. Viltrumite muscles also adapt under pressure until pretty much anything becomes trivial. They also don't require the physical bulk of muscles to be strong, and their body chemistry is so dense and efficient that it grants them amplified strength even with very lean builds. But now if we were to get into specifically strength, let's start off with the fact that planet Viltrum has 1.25 times the gravity of Earth, or about 25% greater than the gravity that you're currently experiencing right now when you wake up and subscribe to Jaded and like the video. This doesn't seem like that much to some, but think about it like this. Anything which weighs 100 pounds or 45 kilograms would now suddenly weigh 125 pounds or 56 kilograms on planet Viltrum. Your typical Viltrumite can constantly move around with about 25% more weight than you're currently witnessing right now, like Goku wearing some weighted clothing, except they do this casually and it's nowhere near the limit of an average Viltrumite. According to a guide, Omni-Man possesses the vast strength of a Viltrumite male his size, stature, and age, and can lift 100 tons. Not every Viltrumite is going to be the same size, age, and stature as Nolan, but given the limited amount of information we have, and since they're going up against fucking Thragg, being generous, let's say the average Viltrumite is the same size, stature, and age as Omni-Man. Nolan is much stronger than your average Viltrumite, however the statement isn't talking about his limits or the maximum that he can output. This statement is just commenting about how Omni-Man possesses the strength of a Viltrumite warrior his size, stature, and age, which happens to be 100 tons. The statement isn't trying to say that Omni-Man's limits are pushing 100 tons because that honestly wouldn't make sense with the feats that we see in the actual series, just that Nolan, like your typical Viltrumite, can also push 100 tons. We still don't know exactly what kind of pressing movement, but assuming that it's a bench press or an overhead press, that would require about 889,000 joules of force, or about 0.89 megajoules. But if you really wanted to highball some of these Viltrumites, if you assume that the statement in context would be talking about your average Viltrumite living on planet Viltrum with 25% more gravity than Earth, then that would be about 1.1 million joules or 1.11 megajoules. This was also playing it safe and assuming that the pressing movement was just lifting it about 1 meter, and if you think the statement refers to Viltrumites throwing the 100 tons, then that would require way more energy. Now surprisingly, this is actually lowballing your average Viltrumite pretty massively. Pushing 100 tons sounds like a lot, but it really isn't that impressive whatsoever. Only being able to destroy a couple buildings or maybe a couple of smaller buildings. Thragg himself says that 37 Viltrumites currently on Earth is enough to tear the planet in half. There's a lot of back and forth about this statement, but in all honesty, considering that he's threatening Mark and Nolan with his army, the people actually on Earth, they're the threat, he's trying to use them, the people already on Earth, he's probably also including himself, and this statement probably isn't referring to 37 random Viltrumites who aren't here in context. These 37 Viltrumites on Earth also aren't your average Viltrumites, they're actually one of the strongest Viltrumites that are still left after the Scourge virus. There are a lot of people who do take this statement hyper-literally and do say that Thragg is talking about 37 regular average Viltrumites, so I am gonna bring it up at the end. Besides random guide statements that downplay Viltrumites and character statements like the one from Thragg, which seems rather ambiguous, we really don't have any exact metric to measure your average Viltrumite. Alan the Alien, after taking out this random nameless Viltrumite, also blatantly says that some are stronger than others, but that's to be expected. However, having large disparities also make it harder to scale exactly where your average Viltrumite would be accurately, since they're all kind of all over the place. If you're really trying to pull some scaling together, you could argue that beginning a series Mark should scale to your average Viltrumite, and this would make sense considering that Invincible really hadn't gone through any training. He also didn't live on planet Viltrum with the 1.25 times the gravity of Earth or even really develop yet at all. If anything, Mark should be far weaker than your average Viltrumite, at least when holding back, considering that your normal Viltrumite would be constantly training and in harder conditions. During the Invincible comics 5th issue, Invincible slams Alan into the moon, with our planet Earth and the moon having an overall distance of 382.5 million meters, then basing the duration of the flight on Alan speaking an entire sentence mid-flight, which in itself is kinda weird, but we'll let it slide. And in other words, Mark throwing Alan is at least multi-continental. Another method for scaling the true average Viltrumite would be using the explosion when the actual planet Viltrum itself exploded. Many long-dead average normal original Viltrumites were hit by the whiplash. These Viltrumites actually made up the ring that's formed around planet Viltrum, and so just using the whiplash created by the explosion and the fact that their bodies weren't completely destroyed, this feat would also put them at multi-continental like Mark's previous scaling. Now that you have a very general understanding of where your average Viltrumite should scale, we can finally talk about Thragg. Thragg himself doesn't really have any crazy showings to calculate like the other Viltrumites, and Mark and Nolan probably have tons of other things that we can measure, and scaling off of their higher feats would probably be easier. One thing I'm gonna have to mention, whether I like it or not, to prevent actual wars happening in the comment section is gonna be that there's a point in the story where Thragg was beaten up by multiple Viltrumites. Firstly, these Viltrumites aren't normal Viltrumites, and they're not the ones that we're gonna be scaling in today's video. These are some of the most elite and the strongest Viltrumites that there are left. But even without using that, let's just talk about the already present context. Thragg isn't even fighting back or really even trying to defend himself at all. Considering Omni-Man is stronger than all of these Viltrumites here, and he still cracks his entire hand against the raw force of Thragg pushing his head into his fist, I'm very much highly doubtful any of them could do anything to Thragg if he was going all out. His fight with Battle Beast happens after this too, where Thragg nearly dies in one of the craziest brawls in the entire universe, which undoubtedly made him stronger. Just to quote 100, who you guys should go check out for his Thragg video, it's basically one big nothing burger. Planet Viltrum's destruction is also one of the best showings of raw power in the entire series, but there's many issues with this example. Neither Omni-Man or Invincible would actually scale to the full output of this blast or the force that it took to actually take down the planet. This took 3 people, and not just them individually. Space Racer also already fired his gun that destabilized the planet's core, and considering that this gun can seemingly one-shot any Viltrumite it makes contact with, without Space Racer present, Mark, Nolan, and Thetis all would have died trying to destroy the planet, and that's even been stated. However, you could argue that through multiple statements like the one made on Skybound's official website, which publishes Invincible, that when they described the destruction of planet Viltrum, it was said that this was directly caused by the three flying into the planet's core without any mention of Space Racer. Statements from Thragg and multiple interviews from Robert Kirkman himself, who's the author of Invincible, also said that planet Viltrum was destroyed by the three of them and no mention of Space Racer either. But in all fairness, none of this really proves that the three could have done it without Space Racer. They're just the cause of the destruction themselves, and that Space Racer destabilizing the planet definitely would not have done it alone. I've already gone far more in depth into this topic on Omni-Man versus Goku, which many of you guys should go check out, so I'll save most of the boring stuff for later. Basically, the short version is that planet Viltrum has 5 total moons, and using something called the Roche limit factor can help us measure exactly how big planet Viltrum must be to have all of those moons constantly orbiting around it. Clearly, this would be much larger than Earth or any ordinary planet, but the exact calculation really depends on who you ask. But most calculations at bare minimum have planet Viltrum 14 times larger than Earth, since the smallest moon appears to be spherical. For those who don't know, because they don't spend all their time studying pointless nonsense like astrophysics to make a YouTube video, only planetoids with enough mass and gravity can actually become rounded. So the smallest possible moon, even with an extreme lowball, would still be planetoid with a circumference of about 600 kilometers. Along with the Roche limit factor, we get planet Viltrum, like I've already explained, to about 14 times larger than Earth. It would take about 120 undecillion, oh my god, I'm gonna sound like an idiot. Undecillion, oh fuck. It would take about 120 undecillion joules to blow up planet Viltrum. Dividing that up among 3 people would be 40 decillion joules per person, and this would be around small star level or even regular star level, being very generous, while somewhere around planet level if you don't think Viltrum is actually that big, and something only like twice the size of Earth with 25% more gravity. But just to make this video a little bit more interesting, and the fact that I'm gonna give multiple interpretations at the end so it really doesn't make a difference, we'll say that Thragg scales to around small star level, assuming that Viltrum is actually the 14 times larger than Earth. Considering Thragg destroys Thetis so bad that I'm gonna literally have to blur it out when I get to editing the video, and along with the stronger versions of Mark and Nolan, using the generous interpretation is probably a bit more fair, since Thragg should scale way above these characters anyways, but we don't have any quantifiable way to measure the gap between them. Now that you have a pretty good understanding of how strong the average Viltrumite would have been, and you also have a pretty good understanding of how strong Thragg should be, at least in a range, you can now go ahead and do the math yourself, buddy. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Using early series Mark, or the whiplash from planet Viltrum exploding, like I've already mentioned, should be a round multi-continental. Assuming that one normal Viltrumite would scale to beginning a series Mark, thousands and even then millions still wouldn't compare to Thragg if you think that he's small star level. In fact, assuming that normal Viltrumites would be a 1 on our scale, that would make Thragg a 43.2 billion. Yes, billion with a B. He's literally, and I'm not even joking, billions and billions of times stronger than the average Viltrumite, even using the beginning of series Mark for scaling. Being a bit more generous towards the Viltrumites and being a little bit more critical against Thragg scaling for the calculation done where planet Viltrum is 14 times larger than Earth to get him to star level, let's say that he's about small planet level instead. Thragg would still be, on our scale, 4,316 times stronger than the normal Viltrumites, but this is a little bit more closer than before. 4,316 Viltrumites to equal out Thragg is honestly a bit more realistic if you ask me. Despite what I've already said about not really wanting to use Thragg's statement about the 37 Viltrumites being capable of tearing the Earth in half, let's just assume that this statement is talking about the very general strength of the Viltrumite race and not Thragg or his army on Earth. There is some debate on what exactly Thragg means when he says tearing the planet in half, with some calculations literally assuming that he's talking about ripping the Earth in two, which would be much harder than just blowing up the planet. If you think Thragg is literally talking about tearing the Earth in two, then that would require 68.91 quintillion tons of force at least per Viltrumite. That would put each of these Viltrumites at small planet level and nearing full planet levels of power, and this could sound problematic for Thragg, but not really. According to BattleBeast, his battle with Thragg could have also torn the planet in half, and this planet is possibly larger than Earth. You're also still assuming that the original statement about the 37 Viltrumites doesn't include Thragg or his army on Earth, which are generally stronger than the average Viltrumite, which means you're not really doing them any favors when we talk about tearing the planet planet in half. Let's say it's not literally talking about tearing the planet in two, and Thragg is just saying that 37 Viltrumites are enough to completely destroy the planet like they have done with Viltrum. Obliterating Earth would still require about 48.4 quintillion tons of force per Viltrumite, assuming that together they can completely destroy the planet. If you're one of the believers that Thragg should scale around small star level, then it would take about 165,000 normal Viltrumites to match him, but if you think that he only scales to around small planetary, then just 37 like the original statement suggests would be more than enough to take down Thragg. Make sure to go check out Goku vs Omni-Man if you like this type of content, and please leave a like on the video.